The first bubble was IT in 1999. The second bubble was housing in 2007. The third bubble was Wall Street in 2008. Government will be the biggest bubble and will fight the most bitterly against change. Whether you're in Greece, California, New York, Japan, you see all the early warning signals. Politicians for 2 generations have promised more than we can afford. As Margaret Thatcher once said, the problem with socialism is you run out of other people's money to spend. And this poses for us a central crisis. And frankly, it's one of the reasons that I like Scott Walker, because he dramatically reformed Milwaukee County and dramatically reduced the number of employees, reduced the cost of government, increased efficiency, improved their bond rating, paid down their debt. And that's just like Chris Christie in New Jersey. This is the model of the next 20 years. I mean, we're going to have to go through this. And so part of the challenge is you have job killers on the left. The job killers on the left want to hide from China and India. They want to actually pay off the trial lawyers, not reform litigation. They want to hire more bureaucrats to have more regulations, not reform regulation. They want to protect the most mediocre and ineffective union members rather than have education reform. They want a tax code which is anti-work, anti-savings, anti-investment, anti-entrepreneur, anti-creative, which is why, candidly, Sean's opponent is an ideal model job killer. I mean, if you look at the time she was in charge of the Economic Development Committee, Wisconsin lost 150,000 jobs. It would be more important, she should have called it the Economic Undevelopment Committee. It would have been a more accurate title for what she was doing. And people on the left don't learn anything from this. I mean, it is astonishing. One of the great surprises of my life. I've done this for a very long time. And I would have thought after the total collapse of Jimmy Carter that it would have been fairly obvious that left-wing ideas don't work. And I thought after the disappearance of the Soviet Union, it would have been fairly obvious that centralized command bureaucracies don't work. And on the academic left, I mean, whether they're in Madison or they're at Chicago or they're at Columbia or they're at Harvard or they're in the White House, on the academic left, they learned nothing because it is a secular religion. They wake up in the morning as an act of faith and they say, if only you will give me control over your life, I will do so much better for you than you can do for yourself. And of course, objectively, it's nuts. I mean, we have at the Center for Health Transformation, you can go to healthtransformation.net. We've created 2 charts which you can download for free, or you can actually buy the chart, although they're pretty expensive because they're so big. The first chart is the 159 offices that Obamacare creates. It's about 3 by 6. The second chart is all the deadlines in Obamacare out to 2020, and in order to have it be readable, the chart is 5 feet by 10 feet. It is 50 square feet. And you look at this and you say to yourself, how could anybody imagine that you could have one person, Don Berwick, who's a brilliant guy, Harvard educated, quite impressive. He runs the Center for Medicare and Medicaid Services, which will now centralize 5.5% of the gross domestic product. It'll be a bigger department than the Department of Defense, and it will make health decisions for 305 million people in a continent-wide nation. Now, does anybody on the planet believe any one person is smart enough to do this? No. And so you begin to see the scale of choice we're going to have. Because we're either going to go down a road of becoming a European secular socialist system in which bureaucrats define your life, the whole system grinds down, mediocrity and decay become normal. Or we're going to go back to the American model, which is fundamentally antithetical to Obamaism. Now, that's the 4th big point. And I'll take a minute or 2 to talk about it because I think it is so central to the future of this country. We are involved in a great campaign in 2010 and in 2012 to decide whether or not government of the people, by the people, and for the people, which is how Lincoln said it. Will survive. Because we are faced with a secular socialist machine which believes in government by the politicians, for the special interest, implemented by the bureaucrats. It is an anti-popular, anti-people model, and it's that fundamental. You know, the president, early in his presidency, went to Europe and did a press conference with Chancellor Merkel of Germany and President Sarkozy of France. And at one point in the press conference, he was asked by a reporter, "How do you feel about American exceptionalism?" And he said, "Well, I think Americans feel they're exceptional, and I think British feel they're exceptional, and Greeks feel they're exceptional." And I read this, and I thought about it for about 6 months, and I went back the other day and reread it. Because I finally realized what it said was he didn't have a clue what the term meant. That he is so out of touch with American history that he has no idea. American exceptionalism comes from one document, the Declaration of Independence, the base of Lincoln's career. Recently, the Library of Congress used new technology, and they took the original handwritten Declaration of Independence, and it has the word citizens in it. But citizens is actually overlaid over an earlier word that Jefferson had erased. And they discovered subjects. Because, of course, historically, we were subjects of the king, because power came from the king. And the key was, what did this new word citizens mean? Now, it relates back to the Romans and it relates back to the Greeks. But in the American model, it's actually quite explicit. And we are the only society in history that says this, in all of human history. That's why Lincoln was so passionate and so willing to fight the Civil War. The Declaration of Independence says, we are endowed by our Creator with certain unalienable rights, among which are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Now, this is simple. This is the #1 issue of 2010 and 2012. Everything else comes from it, because it leads to job creation, and rejecting it leads to job destruction. It leads to every American having opportunity, and rejecting it leads to every American being trapped in mediocrity. It leads to personal freedom and your community having local control and local impact, and rejecting it leads to a Washington-centered dictatorship of bureaucrats who define every aspect of your life and punish you if you don't want to do what Washington wants you to do. That's that fundamental. And the Founding Fathers knew it was that fundamental. So the first ground rule would be to have every school, every class, and this should apply to Wisconsin as well as the rest of the country, study the Declaration, and the teacher should have to actually explain what did the Founding Fathers mean by Creator? This is not imposing religion on public life. This is reporting accurately on the history of the United States and the intention of the people who created the United States. Well, we all know what it meant. In fact, I wrote a book, and Clist and I did a movie called Rediscovering God in America that walks you through every monument and shows you what it meant. Now think what this means. You are the only society in history which says power comes from God to each one of you personally. You are personally sovereign. You then loan power to the state. But the state's never sovereign. The state does not define your rights. God has defined your rights, which is frankly why Kagan is totally wrong in her interpretation. And I just read her testimony. She's totally wrong about America. The Constitution is not the beginning of American rights. American rights are historic rights owned by the citizens who loan power to the government. And the Constitution has to be interpreted within the framework of the rights you already have. There's a second part. It says the rights are unalienable. What does that mean? It means no judge, no bureaucrat, no politician can take away your rights. Now, the courts have begun to forget this, and so I want to give you a tiny, brief history lesson. So you understand what I'm saying. It's not theoretical. It's not right-wing ideology. It's just a report from a history teacher.